In 1959 Russia, 9 hikers ripped their tent open from the inside and ran into freezing snow barefoot. The autopsies, in this case, are where things stop making sense. When rescuers found the hikers' tent, it wasn't destroyed. It was still standing, but it had been cut open from the inside. All their boots, coats, food, everything still inside, which means they didn't slowly leave. They panicked and got out fast, and their footprints, they showed the group actually walked away calmly at first, not running, which makes it even weirder. The first bodies found, the ones near the trees, were ruled as deaths from hypothermia. But even then, there were strange details. Some of them were wearing pieces of each other's clothing, like they were trying to stay warm after someone had already died. That tells investigators some of them survived longer than others. The last 4 bodies were found in a ravine months later, and were completely different. Their injuries were extreme: crushed ribs, skull fractures, internal damage so severe it was compared to a car crash. But here's the key detail. There were almost no external wounds, so whatever caused it didn't leave the kind of marks you'd expect. As I said previously, one of the hikers were missing her tongue and parts of her face. Officially, they suggested it could have been from natural decomposition or animals, but it still added to the mystery. And then there were small amounts of radiation found on their clothing, not enough to kill them, but enough to raise questions. After the autopsies, the case was quickly shut down. The official explanation, basically an unknown compelling force. And at first, authorities didn't even want to release the bodies back to families right away. There were delays, restrictions, and very little transparency about actually what happened. So did the Soviet government actually try to cover this up, or was it just a really weird accident? After everything was found, the case was basically closed with one explanation: an unknown compelling force. Yeah, that's literally what they wrote. Today, most experts lean towards some kind of avalanche, not a huge, obvious one, but a smaller slab of snow collapsing onto their tent that could explain why they cut their way out and left quickly. But here's the issue. There wasn't clear avalanche damage at the site. And, the first bodies weren't buried in snow. Their items weren't buried in an avalanche. And some of their injuries don't fully match a typical one. So people started looking at other possibilities. Some think it was a military test, like explosives or parachute mines going off nearby, which could explain the internal injuries and panic. Others say infrasound, basically wind creating a frequency that can cause intense fear and dissociation. And then there was the more extreme theories, like UFOs, especially because people reported orange lights in the sky around that time. Yeah. Here's where that cover-up idea comes in, which I think is the theory I think is the closest to what happened, because we'll never know what happened, but the area was closed off by the Soviet government for years after. Access was restricted, information was limited, the investigation itself was pretty vague, and some documents weren't fully available until decades later. I started wondering, were they hiding something, or just didn't know what happened? The bodies were eventually returned, but there were delays, and some families reported being told very little about what actually happened.